Let me start again.
Yeah.
Thanks to Pete and Laura. It's wonderful to be here. How many of you were not present in yesterday's evening's presentation? Oh, not. If you were not present. Oh, still so many. Okay, this is a different audience then. All right, in a sense that is good because I get to start from beginning, which means that you don't have any prior concepts that you bring. But of course, half of the audience were there yesterday evening, so you heard a little bit of something. I'm sure things are still very much clouded, which it should be. We always enter knowledge from unknowing. A mystic wrote a book called Cloud of Unknowing. Beautiful name because there is no other way of entering real wisdom without entering unknowing. Niels Bohr used to say that you must be confused before you can understand quantum physics. Unknowing, once again. We have to give up the kind of knowledge that we bring with us. And it's not easy, because they are surreptitious, this belief system, as psychologists call them now. But it's one thing to call them by name, another thing to understand or recognize what my belief system really is. One thing we know, that the current belief systems that you all bring, and I think I can speak quite generally, they are certainly conflicting. They're not consistent. And this inconsistency is creating a general malaise, a dis-ease of the entire human race. And part of the problems that we see around the world is a reflection of that confusion, malaise, disease, whatever you want to call it. Okay? This is not debatable. If you don't see that the world is full of problems today, you have no reason to come here. You can go your happy-go-lucky way, and that's okay. And many people, of course, do that. But the fact that you are here makes me very joyful, because obviously then you have an interest in terms of, is there a way out, this question? Is there a way out of this situation, this conflict? Conflict between thinking and living, the way we think and the way we live. In 1973, I was at a conference, and I was a theoretical nuclear physicist of some standing, full professor at an American university. So I was quite pleased with my academic accomplishment, but inside I was very unhappy. And this unhappiness showed up in this conference where I was invited to give a talk, which is quite prestigious, as you know, if you are a professional, and most of you are. But I was not happy. I delivered my lecture, and then as soon as the next lecturer came and delivered his, immediately I started feeling unhappy because his was clearly better. I was jealous, and he's clearly getting more attention. I was jealous, and this happened with every other speaker. Everyone was better than me, and everyone was getting better reception, and I was just jealous, jealous, jealous. In the evening, I was at a party, and here I was, a married man from India, not very long ago. I was just in the country for 10 years, and so not Americanized yet. Very much Indian, very sexually quite conservative and so forth. But still, I'm expecting women to pay attention to me, and they're not, and therefore again, jealous, jealous, jealous. So this goes on until 1 o'clock in the morning. And then I get disgusted and also a little bit scared because all the antacid tablets that I used to carry with me, they were gone. I finished them all during the evening. And so I go outside to get some relief, and the conference was taking place, fortunately, at the side of the ocean, Pacific Ocean to be specific. And the ocean air hits my face, and all of a sudden, completely uninvited, unexpected, a thought comes. I'll never forget that thought. Why do I live this way? That was the thought. And the thought immediately was followed by a complete conviction that I don't have to. I do not have to do physics in this unhappy, career-oriented way. I can find physics to do that will make me happy. Eventually, that translated into a translation which said that I need to integrate my thinking with the way I live and the way I made my livelihood. And many years later, in 2009, after I had already made discovery of happy physics, happy science in general, the idea formed into a movement that I call quantum activism. Basically, what I want to initiate you into in this weekend for your consideration is a way of thinking that quantum physics gives us that allows us to integrate thinking, living, and livelihood, and can set humanity in the right direction of evolution. In other words, it's a complete new way of looking at ourselves, examine where we came from, examine where we are capable of going, see the signs of what the problems are, see the signs of where the solution could be. We have to have very open mind. And then, according to our inclination, we choose. Every one of you have to make that choice. It is always a question of choice for humanity. This has been a problem. The choice is very, very difficult to make because the world is full of what we can call camouflage. It's not very clear what things really are like and why it was made that way. Well, from the beginning, there is a little bit of a problem. It will become clear very soon. That's why it has to be that way. So, let's begin at the beginning then. Why quantum physics? You know, science was founded basically into physics and chemistry originally, and it started with really chemistry, much more than physics. But physics became the paramount science very quickly. Why? Because physics is mathematical. Mathematical logic is very enticing and quite accurate. We sometimes forget that, and sometimes we carry it to an extreme. But the fact remains, and we should all be very grateful to Mr. Newton, who discovered the first equations that describe the behavior of material objects. And this started physics. We now call it Newtonian physics or classical physics. And this gave us a description of reality. Before then, the description of reality was philosophical, religious. Religious description of reality did not come overnight. It actually came from certain seers who were now called mystic, but that's not a very fair name. They are not as mystical. Mystical basically means mysterious. They are not as mysterious as it seemed to the initial scientists. But what happened was that the mystics' teaching were converted according to the needs of a few people, these religious leaders. And they converted the teaching to suit their purpose. And the same thing happened to science. Mr. Newton was one of the greatest scientists of all times, and he certainly definitely explored his knowledge, his wisdom from curiosity and nothing else much in his mind. But later on, people interpreted his science in very different ways. Just as the spirituality was started with the ideas of mystics, but people interpreted the spiritual teaching very differently. And this is something that is basic. This is a workshop, and first thing I want you to notice is this tendency that the human mind right now has. And this is the human mind that we are familiar with. We are not familiar with the human mind that existed before the present era. Present era started about 12,000 years ago. It's the only historical era that we know. Before then, we know very little. Anthropologists make some claims, and we can trust some of their data because it's reasonable. But this era, which started same time as large-scale agriculture started about 12,000 years ago, this era is called the era of rational mind. What do we know? What do you need to know about rational mind that is striking? Well, the word rational means something as logical. And logic, as you know, is step by step. It's hierarchical. Step-by-step situation we call hierarchical. One thing rests on another thing. You make some basic assumption, and then you look at consequences. That's logical thinking, hierarchical. Okay? So it behooves logical thinking. People who do that, they very soon realize that if I am capable of imposing my assumptions and the way I can carry out the logic, then I would have a certain superiority over my fellow human beings who may not be able to carry out the intricacies of the logic as good as I can. So this idea that I can do better than my fellow human beings in a certain way is called elitism. Can you all see if I write? Okay. Elitism. I am better than you. I am higher than you. Higher meaning always this hierarchy. Lowest level people, hierarchy. This is where the power is. Right? Hierarchy. My basic assumption is the basis of your thinking. That makes the hierarchy. I am making this basic assumption. Causal superiority of the people who make the basic assumptions. This started one way of thinking that today we call religious way of thinking. Okay? religion, as I said, came from spiritual traditions. Spiritual traditions came from the discovery that there is a spirit. And what is the spirit? Spirit is actually something that is very interesting concept. It's very, very succinctly can be defined as a oneness. Spirit is the idea that all of us are really one spirit. The separateness is an illusion. This is the idea. So that's where religion originally came from. But look at what religion did with it. If everybody is one, then there is no superiority, inferiority, right? So elitism does not prevail. But elitism is built into the human brain. Of course, the ancient people did not know that, but now we know that. Science has enabled us to discover that it's built into the human brain. So what happens with elitism? This idea of oneness gets converted into a hierarchy like this. This hierarchy is called the God hierarchy. So we have a king of kings, and then there is a king, and then there are courtesans of king, and religious leaders, and then rest of the people. Sort of. There are many, many subdivisions in between. That's up to you. That's not important. So this is one hierarchy that prevailed for many, 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 many centuries. And then science came about in 16th, 17th century. Again, the basic starting point was one of equality. Basic starting point of science, the mathematical equations were given. And so again, the idea is that mathematical laws rule the world. Physical mathematical laws rule the world. Sounds very equal, doesn't it? It's laws. Nobody is superior. Laws govern us, and the laws are basically deterministic laws. Our machinations, intentions, etc., are not very relevant. It's really determined behavior all the way. So that part is very similar to religion. Religions also said that our freedom, etc., all those are illusions. It's all really God. God decides everything. And here we have replaced gods by laws decide everything. So that part is very similar. But I want you to notice that the egalitarianism is remarkable. Because if laws govern, then obviously everybody is subject to laws, the kings as well as the serf. So indeed, under such a situation, we could have wonderful systems for the first time in human history called democracy, capitalism, and liberal education. Why am I talking about this? Because quantum activism is not only a way of thinking, but it is also a way of thinking for rescuing the human systems which have gone awry, which is why we are activists. We want to change not only ourselves, that's the part where we want to integrate our own thinking, living, and livelihood, but also we want to save the institutions which has given us a tremendous amount of hope for ordinary people, and that hope is represented by these three systems. I cannot emphasize more how revolutionary these systems are and how spiritual they are. Democracy truly, like the American Constitution says is best, democracy truly declares all people are created equal. That's the first line of American Constitution. A little bit of mistake there. Quantum physics says all people are created with equal potentiality. But that's a rather fine distinction. The word potentiality is a quantum word that was not known to the founding fathers of American Constitution. But otherwise, it's a beautiful document, and which was the first democratic constitution written in humanity. And everybody more or less have followed this. This is, in this country, there is a democracy. And you know how important that is. But it is now being threatened everywhere. America itself is now under a huge cloud of an autocratic president. And in Europe, various places are under the same kind of attack, as you know. Capitalism has been in danger for a long time. It has never really been all that successful in terms of its basic motif. And perhaps the basic motif has never been quite right, because there has been problems from the beginning. We'll come to that later. Liberal education is an excellent idea because it says all kinds of dogmas to be avoided. Don't start with any initial assumptions that's contrary to experimental data and our experience. We must verify every idea with experimental data and our own experience, and then only we can trust those things. Dogma is an idea that cannot be verified, unverifiable idea. So the idea is really remarkable. We should be dogma-free. We should not allow any idea which is unverifiable into our philosophy of living, our philosophy of constructing our social systems. Right? It's as clear as that. So the beginning that we had after science came around, this is all 18th century. This basic stuff is 16th, 17th century. So look at how wonderful a beginning science made. But again, elitism hit science. Is this, I mean, you don't mind my writing, my handwriting is terrible, but it's okay so far? Yes? Okay. So how did this get corrupted? Wonderful beginning again. How did this get corrupted? Well, first an idea that came was knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. Very interesting. The word power was used. We'll talk about the word power a whole bunch. So what does that translate to in the human psyche? Now, here is the thing. I might as well now make it explicit. What the problem is, we have one thing that you have to deal with. I've already have mentioned that. This is the rationalism, power of logic. But that is not what is being said here. Knowledge is beyond logic, logic plus something. But rationalism is something that we have to deal with. But rationalism exists only in connection with the brain. We still have the problem with the fact that rationalism comes via the brain. All that we are expresses itself via this 3-pound instrument that we have, namely the brain. And also, of course, we have a body too. So maybe the body also contributes, but body is not the site of rationalism. Rationalism says, okay, it all comes from the brain. But the brain is a funny instrument. It not only has rationality, and this is the funny part, unavoidable part. Not only the brain has rationality, it is also the site of something that we must call emotion, emotionality. And these emotions they are not rational. Not only not rational, but specifically, they are also, according to the rational mind, mostly negative emotionality. So brain has emotionality, and mostly it's experienced as negative. This too is the evaluation of the rational mind. So, what are these negatives? We know all of them. Anger, I was talking about jealousy, that woke me up that one day. Many other negative emotions. Envy is one, anger is one that we frequently feel, grief is another one. So many of them, okay? But one stands out. And this is what gives rise to elitism. This negative emotion is called domination. There's a circuit in the brain that when that becomes excited, we want to dominate others. Or the negative side of it, when we miss that domination, we become kind of inferior, fearful. And this domination then, if knowledge is power, then we'll use knowledge for elitism. So why do we use knowledge for elitism is for this domination circuit. So whoever has the knowledge will use it for elitism. Before we had that knowledge of spirituality, everybody is the same. How do we make that into a elitism? Amazing, no? But we did it by converting the oneness into God, and God is King of Kings, and then we made a hierarchy, and we convinced people that this is the way to think. And now, present day, how do we dominate people? We again have made into a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is called matter-based hierarchy. Matter is everything. Why does this give you a hierarchy that becomes quite pressing? Because this matter is everything philosophy. If spirit also exists, remember, both are founded on human experience. Spirit was not an empty discovery. It was the discovery of the initial scientists, who are now called mystics. But they were scientists of consciousness, and they discovered, they actually experienced the oneness with people. Is it possible to experience the oneness with people? Yes. I have experienced it. You also occasionally experience it. It's called oceanic feeling. Everybody occasionally experiences spirituality, and this is why spirituality is still popular. We cannot not experience spirituality except for the sociopaths and psychopaths who don't. But there are not that many of them. Majority of people do experience it, and then question is, how do you rationalize it? What do you say about it? That's the question, not that you don't experience it. And this matter is everything is also based on the experimental data that scientists collected. It's also not devoid of knowledge, but both knowledges are being used for elitism is my main point. Matter is everything philosophy gives you elitism. How? Because matter is everything is incomplete if spirit is also everything. If spirit is real, then obviously this cannot be true. Just as spirit expresses itself in terms of matter, so if spirit leaves out matter, which is what religions do, then that is also obviously not complete knowledge. And incomplete knowledge will always be very complicated. How did these religious people maintain their superiority over ordinary people? Because religions were so complicated. The books are very difficult to read for ordinary people. So many things that you have to master before you can join the elite. Hasn't the same thing taken place right now? A few people in the higher institutions of learning, they determine what reality is like, and their findings are mathematical, technical, and so complicated that rest of us cannot handle it. We leave it to the specialists, and they dole out what it is about. So both hierarchies that we have, human societies are based on, religious hierarchy and the material hierarchy, they both are based on the idea that incomplete knowledge is always very complex. Why it has to be complex? Because we are making up the deficiency. This is extremely important to start with. Leads to complex systems. Because they are trying to hide the lack of knowledge, lack of complete knowledge. And that requires a lot of sophistry, Much of today's knowledge, as all of you are professionals, you have gone through the colleges and universities, and so many books you have read, and what part of the books do you use? It's amazing, isn't it? We hardly use maybe 5%, actually maybe 1% of the books that we read. And even less we remember. So therefore, it is very clear that we have a problem. Elitism is the problem, and incomplete knowledge is a problem too, but incomplete knowledge is something we don't have much control on, because how do we get complete knowledge? How do we know that we have complete knowledge? So we can never say that our knowledge is now complete, so that we have to live with. Incomplete knowledge cannot be helped, but we can always try to make knowledge as complete as possible. So long as you keep the journey straight, okay, let's take the best of knowledge that is available right now. That's so our principles are best of available knowledge, and the other thing that we do, that we know is good, is the one that I began with, that if we have division or separateness, or conflict, it leads to these E's. So integration is a good idea. Integration, congruence, that's another word. These are good ideas. So we try to be as congruent as possible between the various knowledge systems that exist at a given time, and we try to integrate as much as possible. So if we take these two principles, that would be good. Best of available knowledge. Right now, for science, the best of available knowledge is quantum physics. Then the question is, can we use quantum physics and then develop a system which does not have the conflicts? So can we, if we can use this system and make a conflict-free knowledge system? Now, to tell you the truth, I started with this. I had no idea that it will give us a conflict-free knowledge system. But there were other ideas available just at the time, and this is common in science. It just so happens that any time a new scientific breakthrough happens, it integrates a lot of conflicting theories. And this time was no exception. As soon as we understand quantum physics, immediately we find that yes, there is similarly a whole bunch of knowledge has risen up in biology, in psychology, other endeavors of in health, and all this are giving us ideas that enables us to find a conflict-free knowledge system. And this conflict-free knowledge system is what I want to present to you for the 2 days that you will share your time with me. Okay? quantum activism is simply defined as the idea of using the quantum physics and this knowledge system that we are talking about, which can be summarized by a few principles, to use those principles to change ourselves and the world. Why do we want to change ourselves and the world? Because part of the knowledge system integrates the two biggest divisions that exist that I went through, the religion and science. This knowledge system seems to integrate those two previous systems. And part of the integration is based on the idea that, yes, the spirit people were right, as were the scientific people. Spirit people were right in the sense that there is a oneness. The scientific people were right in the sense that we all depend on the material hardware for our existence. The material body is as essential as the spiritual oneness to make us what we are. Both are essential. And when we do that, when we integrate the two, it gives us those principles. And one of the principles are that, yes, that fundamental oneness is correct, but it's a potentiality. And then we add a very wonderful new knowledge that did not exist before, which is that evolution is taking us towards expressing that oneness. We were less one before the journey of life began. Yes, is there oneness in the amoeba? There is, indeed, a little bit. But that oneness gets better and better. It's much better with cats and dogs and cows and elephants. And it's definitely very much better even in the primitive human being. And now in the 21st century, the potentiality is taking shape in such a way that we can truly say that we have an unprecedented opportunity of expressing this oneness in our thinking, in our living, in the way that we make livelihood. This is what makes this idea of quantum activism so beautiful. Why should I also try to change the world? Because as I grow towards this oneness, which is where evolution is taking me, then I realize that I'm not really separate from my fellow human beings, and therefore it is my prerogative to not only serve myself, but also serve the world. Because that's where the future of the world is. We have to be together. Now, this awareness has entered people from many different directions. In this country, for example, there is a vast amount of ecological awareness. Scandinavian countries and Baltic countries are leaders right now in terms of ecological awareness. And that awareness is not different from the awareness that I'm talking about. It's the same part of the same movement. We are seeing it from very different angles. Economists are seeing it by talking about how capitalism, which was originally based on the idea of selfish interest dominates everything else, must give way to both selfish interest and community interest. Similarly, in biology, we have similar tendencies of showing that evolution in the Darwinian way of conceptualization is not the right one. A different conceptualization is needed. Darwinism is very much full of fault, all kinds of things that don't agree with experimental data. So that's a second one. Third one from psychology, a huge one, which is that our self in terms of the selfish self is not a complete description of ourselves. Instead, we really have a transpersonal self as well. We have a self that reaches out to other people, self of relationship. And of course, we all know that human beings cannot live by just oneself. We need relationship. And similarly, in health, we find that indeed this idea that you can just take care of the physical body and that will take care of your health is false. We have to attend to our mind. We have to attend to our life energies. That idea has come back again in the form of alternative medicine. And so everywhere you look, every knowledge system you look, there is the clear indication by the thinkers of that particular knowledge system that we have been dealing with incompleteness. In order to complete it, we have to have some new element. Only thing that is lacking is that where does these new elements come from? Can we make one science of everything? And what I want to show to you, and hopefully in the following sessions, you will participate with me. You will ask me questions, and we will have a dialogue much more than the one-sided talk that I just gave. This is just to set the background, set the context of what we are going to talk about. But this is what we are really going to do. I want you to motivate yourself towards this idea that quantum physics gives us some wonderful integrative ideas, and we can use those principles to make a much more complete understanding of the situation so that we can make ourselves better and humanity better and get on with our proper direction of evolution. Okay? Thank you.